either as a continent, an island, whatever it might have been, but that it was indeed physical and here on this planet?
Yeah, I am personally convinced of that, and I kind of have to be, because even if we go back to Plato and Socrates, Socrates, he said something like, Atlantis has the very great advantage, he said, of being a fact and not a fiction. We have Plato, we have the ancient scholars of Rome, we have Egyptians talking about it, we have, the people in South America. There's not a culture on the face of this earth. Jack Barringer, who's a writer on this, he wrote a book called Past Shock. He says that 30,000, that's the stuff that hasn't been burned yet, 30,000 texts still exist to this day that mention, antediluvian civilizations. And when you study the Celtic record, nothing could be clearer. The ancient Celtic people, my ancestors, speak very specifically about coming to Ireland because 4, not 1, but 4 continents had sunk beneath the waves, and they have Gaelic names for those. And they clearly say that they are survivors from a lost, continent.
And was it an advanced group?
So advanced it would boggle the information, and I think this is one of the reasons why it hasn't been taken seriously. The Celtic people, they mentioned 4 islands, Phalius, Murius, Gorius, and Phineus, and on each of those islands, which made up Atlantis, or the different continents of antiquity.
Almost like the Hawaiian Islands are that make up a whole, right?
Yes.
That kind of thing.
Similar to that. And on each of these different islands, they had a specific sort of compartment of experts. Like on one island would live the mathematicians, on another island would live the herbalists, on another part of Atlantis or these ancient continents would live the
by design they did this?
Yes. To keep things sacred, it was a sort of a way that they had their own little order of things, that the stargazers and the astrologers would live in one area.
That's fascinating.
The archivists, the people who took care of the writing down of the history, would live on another. It was just this little way that they did it,
Good way to control things as well.
I wouldn't be surprised, yeah.
Do you know whereabouts these islands, this continent might have been?
Yeah, absolutely. Here's one of the pieces of disinformation. In your opening for me, you definitely said that, one of the benefits of what I do is clear up a lot of disinformation.
Yes.
There's one piece of disinformation or error, and that is that Atlantis is not a continent. Atlantis was a citadel or a city-state, just like London is the city of England, right? But London could have an empire, couldn't it, just like it did?
Absolutely. And Rome.
And Rome, too. Exactly. Good point. And the same thing with Atlantis. Atlantis was not the continent. The continent that Atlantis was on was called Appalachia. It was one of 4 gigantic continents that have long since disappeared from our Earth. And Atlantis was the city-state or the citadel that was built there by the visitors from another dimension.
All right, when we come right back, Michael, tell us a little bit about where you think that might have been. Of course, as you know, Edgar Cayce believes Atlantis was near the Bimini Islands off the eastern side of the United States. Let's get your take on that and much more, because we're going to get into the alien part of it in a moment. And welcome back to Coast. George Norrie here with Michael Tsarion, our guest. His book, Atlantis, Alien Visitation and Genetic Manipulation. Okay, Michael, before the break, you were going to tell us where you think the city of Atlantis might have been with those cluster of islands.
Yeah, George, it was definitely on Appalachia, which the science is in now that actually proves where Appalachia was, and it was where a lot of the original scholars said that it was, which is in the Atlantic Ocean, north of the Azores. The Azores was probably very much part of it. The British Isles were certainly part of it, and even where we would now, on a map, see Greenland, Iceland, and even stretching as far up as the Atlantic. Some people say that the continent of Appalachia was so big in the north that basically where Siberia is, you could walk the whole way. You could walk right across the northern, and of course it wasn't tundra, and it wasn't all frozen over. These were very beautiful, temperate climates in those days. And of course, as soon as I say that, it's like the same thing I do when I'm doing talks. People, detract, and they say, no, wait a minute, we've just been finding it under the, Mediterranean, or wait a minute, even Jim Allen has done some fine research. He's looking at Bolivia, and you have different individuals always every, it's a perennial myth. So everybody, in this community will turn over a rock somewhere and say they found Atlantis. Now, I have to be kind of strict about this because I'm very sure of my facts. And that is that they're not finding Atlantis. It's the same old metaphor we were using when we were talking earlier, and that is that just as Britain had an empire, when you have an empire, whether that empire stretches to Delhi or Tierra del Fuego, you will build buildings in the same style, will you not,
right,
as are found in the capital
you
city.
You sure will.
In the headquarters, because your minions, your lackeys are going to rule and officiate from those zones out in what you have as your empire. So what these individuals are finding is not Atlantis proper, but it is the outposts or the various tentacles of the empire of Atlantis in those days. Or they may even be finding something completely separate, because as I said, Atlantis was not the only pre-Diluvian culture or civilization that existed in those times. So again, this is a controversial piece of information that I give out. I have had many debates with other scholars, and we've talked about this. And you see, the evidence is in, actually, because there was a book, if I may mention it,
yeah, go ahead.
With your permission, there's a book that came out in the 90s by, I believe this is the head of the archaeological or paleoarchaeological faculty in Oxford, and his colleague is the same expert, the dean of archaeology in Cambridge University, and their names are Allen and Delaire, and they wrote a book called When the Earth Nearly Died. They followed it up in 2000 with a book called Cataclysm, and it has always astonished me since those books have come out that there's not been worldwide debate on them, because the science is in. These gentlemen, who are the most illustrious names in these sciences that one could even imagine, even though they come from the Orthodox, enclave, have absolutely proven the existence of these of what the ancient and even some of the more scandalized maverick scholars have been saying about Atlantis. Their book is not on Atlantis, but it contains the science that now can conclude. Anyone who has a background with Atlantis will find those books, very important. I have large abstracts from their books in my book, and they've certainly helped me. So to me, it was in the North Atlantic.
Now, what time period do you think we're talking about, Michael?
That's a good one. Always is, the jury's kind of always out on that. I would say that the people who created Atlantis, that's these visitors, I have a belief that they arrived here somewhere between 30 and 50,000 years ago. This is where I differ dramatically with Zacharias Sitchin, who pushes the dates strangely way far back.
Okay, but even though you two differ on the dates, are you two talking about similar inhabitants, basically?
We are. He is tracking them mostly from the historical era, which is, the Mesopotamian rise of the great cultures there.
Right.
Of course, he talks about things further back, but he's basically situating these individuals in Mesopotamia and that they have been affecting society from there. I concur with that, as a matter of fact. The only thing that I may differ, these things are really unimportant in a way, but the one thing that I do differ is the dates. I believe that there's more than enough evidence to prove that these individuals were here much more recently, and between 30 and 50,000 years ago.
Okay, so what do you think? And of course, I can't wait to start talking to you about where you think they came from, but what happened to Atlantis and the continent of Appalachia?
Yeah. Let me give you an outline first, and then we can pick from this the key point. In my book, I talk about the arrival, because of course we're talking about an enormous amount of research and an enormous amount of information.
And you are absolutely convinced what you're about to tell us happened, in your opinion, based on your research.
100%. I'm from a culture, both on my Indian side and on my Irish side, that just wouldn't bother my ass going out there to tell you the truth and telling people things that I was not 100% convinced of, because that is my culture, that's my tradition. It's very important, and all the more important because I am not one who, necessarily buys into the, orthodox structure of education. That doesn't mean that then I'm let off the hook. That, in my book, the antiquarian, the independent scholar, needs to be even more source-orientated, more diligent with his research, because he is now, has the burden of proof in a way.
Okay, all right.
What we're talking about here is that these visitors arrive, and they take refuge on our Earth, and in fact they also take refuge in the Earth, under the ground in caves that were here, which of course the wonderful scholar, who am I thinking of? It's the very energetic Eric von den Eycken.
Yes.
has been doing wonderful research for many decades on the underground caves. But when they arrived here, they precipitated the destruction of the planet that Zechariah is also working on. That planet was called Tiamat. It wasn't a comet that came into our atmosphere. It was actually a planetary body that existed between Mars and Jupiter about 50,000 years ago, and it's not there now. It's
because that's the asteroid belt.
That's the asteroid belt, and that was actually destroyed. It didn't just blow up on its own. That was actually destroyed in this great story that unfolds in the book. And then the visitors came here and settled eventually after the somewhat restored to order, because of course you can't have an upheaval like that in our solar system without tremendous after effects. But then they come out onto the surface. They establish their headquarters on Appalachia.
Now, at that time, before they came here, Michael, that region was what? Just an island, a city, just trees, just basically what you'd see out there in the wilderness.
Yeah.
Okay.
In fact, Tolkien seems to indicate that it was very much similar to. It's very curious that the people who made the Lord of the Rings movie chose to go to New Zealand, and because that is what Tolkien explained. He didn't call it Atlantis; he called it Numenor, but he meant Atlantis.
Okay.
The Scandinavian people call it Hyperborea. There's different names for Atlantis, but they talk about it being very similar to Scotland, very similar to Finland, similar in topography to the Scandinavian countries, to Ireland perhaps, and to New Zealand. But it was nothing there, except the indigenous people of the earth who are no more. Because when these visitors came here, they had a plan for us, or for our ancestors anyway. Well, when some sort of normalcy came to the planet Earth, and these guys are wondering where are they? They came out and they started making contact with the indigenous people that were our true ancestors, and that is where the main action started. Because not only did they create Atlantis, they then started to interact with the individuals on our Earth, and they began a very long-lasting genetic hybridization program, which probably lasted many centuries.
Are they what is referred to in the Bible as the sons of man, or are we talking there about angels, fallen angels?
We are talking about the fallen angels.
Okay.
I am absolutely specifically speaking about the Anunnaki, and I am speaking about...
Okay, good. So we can rule that out.
Yeah, and why I use those terms in the book, and why I also use other terms is because, remember, I'm coming at this from what the Celtic records say. Scholars like Zechariah have, focused beautifully on what the Sumerian, Babylonian records have said.
Sure.
There are a few people who even looked into what the Mayan records have said.
And like you say, they could have been spread out all over the place.
And they were.
Okay.
And the most important thing is, though, I believe, and why my work is so well received, is specifically because of one thing, and that is very few scholars, I'm talking through hundreds of years, have dealt with this Celtic gnosis, this archive of wisdom that is in the Celtic tradition, in a serious way, connecting it, dovetailing it in with these theories about visitation. And I couldn't believe why not, because there it is. It's as plain as day if you know what you're reading. In the Arthurian legends, in the whole of the the sagas and mythologies of the Celtic race is the secrets of the pre-Diluvian times, the wars of the gods, the coming into our world of evil, the hybridization, the super technologies. It's all there, just like it is in the Babylonian. And I would go so far as to say that it is even a deeper and richer archive of knowledge about this subject. So say a scholar is studying this like crazy, they've got a tremendous fascination into these subjects. If they're not reading and looking at the Celtic thing properly, they are missing out big time, George, because that is where the real secrets are that are actually not found in the Mahabharata, or they're not found in the Eastern legends, and they're not even found in the Babylonian Sumerian record as richly as they are in the Celtic.
Right. Sitchin says that they came here based on his interpretation of the Sumerian texts to mine gold for their atmosphere.
Yeah.
Your thoughts on why they came here?
Okay, now we're into something that, again, is a point of contention. Like I say, I agree with a great deal of what he's written, but the thing is two things. One is that Zechariah Sitchin, for some reason, does not cross-reference a lot of what he's talking about with the comparative mythologies of the world, except for maybe here and there.
No, they're just based on his interpretation of those texts.
Good point, George. And here's the second part to that. He is also, unfortunately, entrusting his wisdom to the records and the histories that are written by the victors. which means the individuals who started these empires in those days wrote down the histories as they saw it. So that's what we